Good evening. My name is Dan Ruth, and I would like to invite you to an evening of Edgar Allan Poe. So welcome to Gather, where I'm going to be sharing two short stories from the master of Gothic horror. The first, the Cask of Amontillado. The second, the very timely, the Masque of the Red Death. Both short stories will be read in their entirety. There will be a brief 2-minute pause in between each one. And just remember, we're live, so anything could happen. But here in the crypts of the Montresor, perhaps we will have a good time. Thank you for enjoying me. So, in the spirit of this piece, turn down your lights and light a candle. Or 3 or 4. And come with me as I attempt to take you out of the world of the mundane and into the world of magic. The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could. But when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You who so well know the nature of my soul will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. That was a point definitively settled. But the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It's equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face. And he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato. Although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared, he prided himself on his connoisseurship of wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting, in gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. In the matter of old wines, he was sincere, and I did not differ from him material in that respect. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. Where to start? Okay. It was about dusk one evening, during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on tight-fitting Paris-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How astonishingly well you're looking today. But, if you please, I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts. Amontillado? Impossible. Right now and in the middle of carnival, I have my doubts. And I was so silly enough to play the fool and Amontillado price without consulting you at first. I mean, you were nowhere to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain. Amontillado. I have my doubts. And I must satisfy them, and since you are clearly engaged, I'm on my way to see Lucchesi. If anyone can tell me he's got the critical turn, he can tell me what... Please, Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from Sherry. And yet some fools believe that his taste is a match for your own. Come, let us go. Whither? To your vaults. Oh, my friend, no. Oh, no. I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucchesi will... I have no engagement. Come. Oh, my friend, no, it's not the engagement, but the severe cold which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are very damp. They're crusted with nitre. Let us go nonetheless. The cold is a mere nothing. Amontillado, you have been imposed upon. And as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish Sherry from Amontillado. Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm. Donning a black mask and drawing a roquelaire close about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I would not be returning until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. Entering my palazzo, I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, I bowed him through several suites of rooms, to the archway that led to the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of a descent, and stood closer together on the damp ground at the entrance to the catacombs of the Montresor. Monsieur Fortunato, if you please. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and his bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. If you please, the pipe. Oh, no, it is further on. But observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls. He turned to me and looked me in the eye with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. Nitre! Nitre, I replied. My dear Fortunato, how long have you had that cough? It is nothing. My poor friend found it impossible to answer for many minutes. It is nothing. No. Come, my friend. We will return. We'll go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You're a man to be missed. For me, it's no matter. No. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there's Lucchesi. Enough! The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of the cough. True, and indeed I'd had no intention of alarming you so unnecessarily, but you should use all proper precaution. Look what we have. A draught of this Medoc would defend us from the damps. Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle which I drew from the long row of its fellows that lay upon the mold. Drink. Drink. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly, while his bells jingled. I drink, I re-drink to the buried that repose around us, and I to your long life. These vaults, they are extensive. But the Montresors were a great and numerous family. I forget your arms. A huge human foot of gold and a field of azure. The foot tramples a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel. And the motto? Nemo me impune licessit. No one attacks me with impunity. That's good. Good. I beg you, be steady, Monsieur Fortunato. Please here, come. Take my arm. The wine sparkled in his eyes, and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. We passed through walls of piled bones, with casks and punches intermingling, into the innermost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by the arm above the elbow. The nitre, see it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are indeed below the river's bed. The moisture trickles among the bones. But come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough, it is nothing. The cough, no. Let us go on. But first, another draft of the Medoc. You look unsteady, my dear Fortunato. I beg you, let us return. It is nothing. I am not your concern. Very well. It is so easy to indulge in our passion for the grape, no? I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it greedily at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw his bottle upward in a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement. Well, you do not comprehend. Not I. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. Pardon? You are not of the Masons. Oh, yes, I am. Yes, indeed. Absolutely. You am impossible. A Mason? A Mason? A sign, then. A sign? It is merely this. I have brought with me this trowel I have kept secretly hidden in my roquelaire. You jest! But let us proceed to the Amontillado. Be it so. I replaced the tool beneath my cloak and again offered him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, then descended further, passing on and descending again, when we have finally arrived at a deep crypt, in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than to flame. Here in the vaults of the Montresors, the walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vaults overhead in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of the interior crypt were surmounted and ornamented in this manner. From the 4th, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess. In depth about 4 feet, in width about 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no special use on its own, but formed merely a support for the colossal roof of the catacombs, and the niche was backed by a circumscribed, solid wall of granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to spy into the depths of the recess. The termination, the feeble light, did not allow us to see. Proceed. Herein you shall find the Amontillado. He stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding the progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered, with his death of cough. A moment more I had fettered him to the granite. In its surface were 2 staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. Pass your hands over the wall. You cannot help but feel the nitre. It is indeed terribly damp. I must implore you, let us return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions of my power. But where is the Amontillado? Yes, indeed. Where is the Amontillado? As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones which I had before spoken. Throwing her aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had indeed a measure worn off. A low moaning cry from the depth of the recess was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long, obstinate silence. I laid the second tier, and the third, and the fourth, and then I heard the profuse, furious vibrations of the chains. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with more satisfaction, I ceased my labors. It sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruption the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly up level to my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the masonwork, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A cessation of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought in an instant reassured me. I continued my work, placing my hands upon the solid fabric of the catacombs, and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I surpassed them in volume and in strength, and when I did this, the clamoring ceased. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I placed it partially in its destined position. But now there came out of the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head.
Very good joke indeed.
Yes, let us be gone. Yes, for the love of God. But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, Fortunato! No answer. I called again, Fortunato! No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining departure and let it fall within. There came in reply only the jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick on account of the dampness of the catacombs. I hastened to make an end to my labor. I forced the last stone into position. I plastered it up. And against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescate. The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal. The redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body and especially upon the face of the victim were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow man. And the whole seizure, progress and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it all in. The wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, now having entered, brought furnaces and massy hampers and welded the bolts dead. They reserved to leave means neither of ingress nor of egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned with such precautions the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine, there was life. All these and securely were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. These were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites formed a long and straight vista, with the folding doors sliding back nearly to the walls on either side, so the view of the whole extent was scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as one might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments here were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left and in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window, looking out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber in which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. But the 7th apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceilings, down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. Here the panes were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now in no one of the rooms of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum amid the profusion of gold ornaments that lay scattered to and fro, or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood opposite to each window a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that projected its ways through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a heavy, dull, monotonous clang. And when the minute hand made the circuit at the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each the lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance, to hearken to the sound. And thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made virtuous, whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce no similar emotion in them. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraces 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then with the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The taste of the Duke was peculiar. He had a fine eye for color and effects. He disregarded the decor of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers thought that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to know that he was not. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great fete, and it was his own guiding taste that had given character to the masqueraders. Be assured, they were grotesque. There was much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what had been seen since in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There was delirious fancies, such as the madman fashions. There was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the beautiful, and not little of what might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams. And these, the dreams writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as an echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the black velvet. And then for a moment all is still, all is silent, save for the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand. But the echoes of the chime fades away. They have endured but an instant, and a light and half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows, through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westerly of the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable draperies appalls. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal, more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears who now indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirlingly on, until at length there commenced the sounding of the bell and the clock at midnight. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolution of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded on the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept with more of time into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled, and thus too it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure who had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself upon whisperingly about, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror and disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well suppose that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the heart of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion, even with the utterly lost to whom life and death are equally jests. There are matters of which no jest can be found. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, enshrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny may have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved by the mad revellers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was bespeckled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, whipped at a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers. The prince was seen to be convulsed in the first moment, with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next, his brow reddened with rage. Who dares? Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we must hang at sunrise from the battlements. It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms, loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had long become hushed at the waving of his hand. The angered prince was flanked with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now with deliberate and stately step made even closer approach to the prince. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there was found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's purse. And while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, the phantom made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him at the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, thence again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage about the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of the deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a dawn dagger, and approached in rapid impetuosity with 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the phantom, having attained the extremity of the black apartment, turned suddenly to confront his pursuer. There was a shrill cry. The dagger dropped, gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterward fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of revelers once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements, the corpse-like mask, which they had handled with so violent a rudeness, untenated by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night. One by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out, and with it the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripod expired, and darkness and decay, and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. The end.